Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll be going through Runoff from problem set 3 of CS50. So how is this program gonna work? While running the program, we would want to enter the names of the candidates as command line arguments and then get the number of voters. And then for each voter, they will have 3 rank preferences that they can place in their votes. So their first ranking vote candidate, their second ranking candidate, and the third ranking candidate, and so on. And for this problem set, we have to be completing a number of functions: vote, tabulate, print winner, find mean is tie, and eliminate, right? Okay, so just a quick rundown on all of the code in the source code. We have some includes that might come in handy. Then we have a restriction in the maximum candidates and candidate votes. And then we have a preferences array. So if you guys watched the walkthrough by Brian, you guys should be able to understand what the preferences is, right? So the I is gonna be the max voters, right? And this is gonna be the rows. So for example, in this situation, we have a total of 5 voters, voter 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And then we have maximum candidates, which is gonna be 3 in this situation. We have Alice, Bob, and Charlie, which is gonna be the number of columns in this 2-dimensional array. And then based on how early the number comes from left to right, that is their ranking. So in this situation, we can see that for voter number 1, they voted Alice as their first choice, Charlie as their second choice, and Bob as their third choice. Why is that the case? It's because Alice comes as number 1 in the candidate array. So before that, we have a structure, and this structure is going to be representing each of the candidates we have in this program, right? So for example, Alice has one of the structures, Bob has one of the structures, and Charlie has one of the structures. And each of the structures is going to have 3 fields: the name, the number of votes that they have, and if they are eliminated or not. And it's going to be represented in a candidates array. So for example, candidate 0 in this situation is going to be Alice, candidate 1 is going to be Bob, and candidate 2 is going to be Charlie. And so moving on, we have the voter count and candidate count, which will come in very handy when we are completing our functions, right? Vote, tabulate, print winner, and so on. And so here we have just checking if the user has at least entered 1 candidate. And then here we are checking if the number of candidates is more than the maximum number of candidates. And then here we are initializing the structure array, right? So for example, we have Alice, Bob, and Charlie, and we are setting their votes to 0 and their elimination status to be false. And then we are checking if the voter count exceeds the max voters that the program has decided on. And yeah, so if it fails any of these requirements, we'll be returning and exiting out of the program. And then now we come to the juicy portion of our program, right? So what are they doing here? So if you guys take a quick look on my iPad on the left, you guys can see that this for loop is looping through the number of voters, right? So we have voter count, right? And then it's just gonna be incrementing, and then we have a for loop right under it. And then in this for loop, we are looping through candidate count, right? And then we have another for loop. So right here, what we are doing is getting the rank based on what the user would like to vote for, right? So it's gonna be starting from rank 1, rank 2, and rank 3. So as you guys can see here, J is 0 in the beginning, and then this is gonna be representing the rankings that they are gonna represent. So for each candidate, there will be that amount of votes. So for example, as you guys can see here, for the very first vote is going to be 0 plus 1. As you guys can see, we will have rank 1, and then rank 2, and rank 3. So while we are asking for the rankings for their candidates, we will be running this vote function. So what is this vote function going to do? If you guys take a look at the specifications, the vote function is gonna be plainly populating the preferences array, right? So if you guys noticed, this I is gonna be representing the voter count, which is gonna be from top to bottom. 0 is gonna be representing the first voter, 1 is gonna be representing the second voter, and so on. So initially, for example, the array is gonna be looking like this, the 2D array, all right? And then based on what I and j is, we would like to be populating the preferences array in our vote function. So let's take a look into our vote function. And here, what we want to do is, for example, this is going to be the voter, right? And then this is going to be the rank. So depending on what the voter is and what the rank is, we'll be populating a specific area of this 2D array. So the 2D array, which is going to be preferences, is going to be something like this: voter and rank. And then depending on what the user has chosen, we'll be implementing 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, depending on the position of the candidate, right? So in the example that Brian has gone through, Alice is going to be number 0, Bob is going to be number 1, and Charlie is going to be number 2, and so on. So how are we going to be implementing this vote function? So depending on who the voter is and what rank their choice is on, we'll be implementing a specific grid in our 2D array, right? And then the contents, right? So what is going to be the content? The content is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, depending on the position of the candidate, right? So as you guys know, we have a candidates array, right? So candidates array, right, is going to be, for example, Alice, Bob, and Charlie is going to be from 0 to 2. And each of this candidates array has 3 fields. We have the name, the number of votes, and then the elimination status, right? So now let's complete this function. So for this, we can do something like this: preferences voter rank. Okay, preferences voter rank is gonna be equals to the name. No, actually it's not gonna be the name of the voter. It's gonna be the position of the voter in the candidate array. So how do we find that out? For that, we have to use a for loop. So for int I equals to 0, I less than the size of the candidate array, which is gonna be candidate count. So candidate count and I plus plus. All right. So now what we want to be doing is checking the name and also the names of each of these candidates in the array, and we'll be comparing if the name of what the user has entered here in this function is similar to the name that is in fact inside the candidates array. So how we do that is using the str compare function. You guys should be pretty familiar with the str compare function because David Mellon went through this in the lecture and also in the plurality problem set. You guys should have used it already. So str compare the name that the user has entered and also the candidate I dot name, right? So we'll be indexing into the field of the structure, and then so basically if the str compare of both of this is equals to 0, we know that both the name and the candidate name is exactly the same, right? And then now that we have found that both the candidate name and the candidates is the same, what we can do is basically preferences is going to be equals to I, because now we know that I is the position of the candidate in the candidate array. So I is going to represent 0 for Alice, 1 for Bob, and 2 for Charlie, and so on, right? Okay, so now there is another functionality of the vote function, which is that once we found that the user has entered a valid name, right, we'll be returning true, and if it's not a valid name, we'll be returning false. So if it answers this if condition, we know that it is in fact a valid name because it aligns with the names that are in the candidates array. So what we can do here is just return true, and return true is gonna exit the function and go back to the main loop. And if we never enter this if condition and we exit the for loop, we know that we need to return false. So that's the completion of the vote function. Now moving on to tabulate. But before moving on to tabulate, just a quick one here. Basically, if the vote function returns a false, then we'll be entering this if condition and exiting the code because the user has entered a wrong name. Okay. So now that the preferences array has been completely populated based on what the user has entered in the rankings, we'll be going into an infinite loop until we find out who the winner is and then break out of the while loop. Okay, so now we'll be doing the tabulate function. So in this function, what we'll be doing is updating the votes field of the candidates array. If you guys can recall, the candidates have 3 fields: the name, votes, and eliminated. And in this tabulate function, we'll be calculating the number of votes that each of these candidates have. So now in this tabulate function, what we want to do is actually loop through the entirety of the preferences array. So for example, the preferences array is 0, 2, 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2, 0, 2, 0, 1, 0, 1, 2. This is the example that Brian used in his video. And so what we want to do is we'll be looping through the preferences array. And for example, we are at the very first vote of so here once again, this is going to be the voter and this is going to be the rank. So what we'll be doing is actually looping through the rankings for each of the voters. So for example, in our first loop, we are in the first voter, and so we see that, oh, the first voter in fact voted for Alice, right? And we see that Alice has not been eliminated yet. So what we do is increment the votes for Alice and then move on to the next voter. And then for the next voter, we see that, oh, in fact, the next voter voted for Charlie. So now we'll be incrementing the votes for Charlie and then moving on to the next preferences. But this is just one case scenario, right? However, if in the situation we see that, oh, voter 1 has voted for Alice, but then Alice is eliminated. So in this situation, what we want to do is move on to the next vote that the voter 0 has voted for, right? And then we see that the next vote is Charlie, right? Similarly to the others, once we go from one voter to the next, we will be starting from the very first ranking. However, if the first ranking person has been eliminated, we would like to move on to the next ranking, right? If the first has not been eliminated, we can just ignore what they voted for in the next few ranks. So let's complete that portion of the code. So right here, what we'll be doing is for int voter, right? So voter is going to be equals to 0, voter less than voter count, and voter plus plus, right? And then here, this is where we will be, looping through all of the voters, right? So voter 1, and then moving on to voter 0, moving on to voter 1, voter 2, voter 3, and voter 4, and so on. And then we'll also be wanting to loop through the rankings that they have chosen, right? So for example, ranking 1, ranking 2, and ranking 3. So here it's going to be another for loop. So int, let's see, rank, right? So rank is going to be equals to 0, rank less than the number of candidates, right? So candidate count, and rank plus plus, right? And then here what we want to do is check the elimination status for the content of the preferences array. So to see what the content, so why we want to see the content of the preferences array is because we want to know who the voter voted for, right? So for example, in the very first square we see here, we see that voter 1 has voted for Alice. So here before we do anything else, voter preference is where we are going to be storing who the voter has in fact voted for. So it's going to be int voter preference, and then preferences. Then we'll be entering into the preferences 2D array. And firstly we have the voter, and next we have the ranking, right? And then what we want to do here is check if the voter preference has already been eliminated. So what we can do here is candidates voter preference dot eliminated. So if the candidate that the voter has voted for has not been eliminated, we can do something like this, false. Then what we want to do is basically increment the particular candidate's votes. So candidates voter preference dot votes, right, is going to be incremented by 1. And then, like I mentioned, we found that, this person that the user has voted for has not been eliminated, and hence we can move on to the next voter. So here we just want to be breaking, right? This break statement is going to be breaking out of this for loop and then restarting from the next voter onwards, right? So now we are probably done with the tabulate function. Let me just double check, and yeah, that should be it actually, if I haven't done anything wrongly. And then next step is gonna be the print winner function. And so this print winner function is gonna be printing out the candidate that has majority votes, and then apart from that we would also want to be returning true so that we know that we found a winner, right? So here what we want to do is first check what is the number of votes that a particular candidate need to have to win, right? So they need to have more than half of the votes for the number of voters. So for example, we have int majority, right? So int majority is gonna be voter count divided by 2. So if they have more than this number, so for example, if we have 5 voters, 5 divided by 2 is gonna be 2.5. then we are gonna be truncating it, so it's gonna be 2. So if any of the candidates has more than 2 votes, then we know that they got majority of the votes and they're gonna win, right? So what we want to do here is check if any of the candidates has more than the majority number of votes, and if they have, we want to print the name of the candidate and return true. So for that we can just use a for loop to loop through all of the candidates. So for int I equals to 0, I less than candidate count I plus plus. So if the candidates index I dot votes has more than majority, then what we want to do is print their name, right? So print f %s \n, then index into the exact same candidates, and then just print the names instead of votes. So candidates I dot name. So that's it actually. And then what we want to do is just return true. And then if we go through the entire for loop and we see that, oh, there isn't any candidates which has more than the majority number of votes, then we just return false in the very end. So now that we are done with the print winner function, let's move on to find min. So in this find min function, we want to try to find which candidate has the lowest number of votes, right? So that we can eliminate them out in the eliminate function. So let's take a look at the find min function. So how do we want to perhaps find the minimum number of votes that the current candidates that are not eliminated yet are on? So let's say we have Alice, Bob, Charlie, David, and Elmo, right? So we want to try to find which user has the lowest number of votes. So let's say, for example, that Alice has already been eliminated, right? Just to make things more difficult, just so you guys seem to have a better understanding. So let's say Alice is eliminated, right? And let's say Bob is here, Charlie is here, David is here, and Elmo is here. And in this situation, we can just ignore the number of votes that Alice has, and let's say Bob has 5 votes, Charlie has 2 votes, David has 1 vote, and Elmo has perhaps 6 votes. So in this situation, how do we find the minimum number of votes in our candidates? So what could be a method that we can use to find the minimum number of votes, right? What we can do is, for example, see what is the maximum number of votes that a candidate might have, which is 100, right? So what we can do is perhaps create a variable that is going to be minimum votes. We initialize it to 100, right? So don't worry, I'll explain why we do that. So initially we have the minimum votes to be 100, and then what we'll be doing is comparing each of the candidates to see if they have lower than the votes that we have initialized here. So how we'll be doing it is loop through the candidates array, right? Candidates array, and then comparing if the candidate's votes is smaller than the minimum votes, right? And if they are, we know that their votes is smaller than the minimum votes, and so we can just say minimum votes is equals to candidate votes. So how will this program run? So initially we have the minimum votes to be 100, and then we compare 100 to 5, Bob's 5. We see that, oh, Bob's 5 votes is much lower than the initialized minimum votes that we have. So we'll be updating the minimum votes to be 5. And then what we'll be doing is looping through once again through all of the candidates. And then we see Charlie has even lower votes than the minimum votes that we have just updated to, which was 5. So we update minimum votes again to 2. And then we can compare 2 again with David, right? And then we see, oh, David has even lower than that. So we'll be updating the minimum votes to 0. And then once again, we'll be checking, to 1 because David is 1. And then once again, we'll be checking the minimum number of votes to Elmo, which is 6. And we see that, oh no, 6 is not smaller than 1. So we know that 1 is in fact the minimum number of votes, right? Don't worry if you guys don't get it right now. Hopefully after typing out the code for this find main function, it will make much more sense to you guys, right? So we have find main, and initially we would want to initialize minimum votes. So int min votes is gonna be 100 because that's the worst case scenario. And then what we will be doing is for int I equals to 0, I less than the candidates count. Candidate count, and I plus plus. And here what we'll be doing is, before anything else, we want to be checking if the individual candidate has been eliminated or not. So if the candidate I dot eliminated is equals to true, we just don't want to do anything about it. So what we can actually do is just check for false. So if the candidate has not been eliminated yet, what we'll be doing is checking if the candidate's dot votes is smaller than minimum votes, right? And if it is, then we know that, oh, in fact, the current candidate I dot votes. And if it is the case, then we know that, oh, in fact, the current candidate has lower votes than the minimum votes that we have calculated earlier, perhaps when we were initializing, or maybe while doing the calculation itself. So now what we want to do is min votes is going to be equals to candidates I dot votes, because candidate I dot votes has an even lower number of votes. And then in the very end of this function, we just want to be returning the min votes. Alright, so that should be the completion of the find min function, right? And now moving on to isTie function. So this isTie function is gonna take in the minimum number of votes, and then what we can do is basically for each of the candidates that has not been eliminated yet, if their number of votes is anything different from the minimum number of votes, we know that there is not a tie. So once I type out the code, it should make much more sense to you guys. So for int I candidates, etc., then we check if they have not been eliminated, and then we see that, oh, if the votes for a particular candidate is not minimum, then we'll know that, you know, in fact, the voters has a different number of votes than the minimum votes, so they have more than the minimum, and then we know that it's not a tie. And here we'll be returning false because we know it's not a tie. But if it successfully goes through the for condition, we know that, oh, it hasn't actually entered this if condition, and we know that, oh, all of the candidates here is exactly equals to minimum, right? And if they are, we know that it's a tie because all of the candidates have the exact same number of votes. So return true. Alright, so now we are done with the isTie function, and finally, last and not least, we are down to the eliminate function. So the eliminate function is gonna be taking in the minimum number of votes, and then what it's gonna be doing is finding which candidate has this minimum number of votes. And once we find out which candidate has the minimum number of votes, we would like to eliminate them. Okay, so once again we can make use of this for loop, but this time, okay, and then once again, just a trick for you guys can just press Ctrl+Shift+I to format all the code. So just now you guys saw that my for was a bit to the left. Ctrl+Shift+I and it's gonna fix it all. So here we loop through all of the candidates, and then we check if the candidates has not been eliminated. Alright, very important. Then we want to be checking. Actually, we don't need the if eliminated function, so perhaps make the code a little bit shorter. Okay, so if a candidate number of votes is exactly equal to the minimum number of votes, what we want to be doing is eliminating this user. So candidate I dot votes, sorry, candidate I dot eliminated equals to true. Alright, so that's the end of this candidate. And yeah, so we just eliminate any of the candidates that have the minimum number of votes. Alright, so now we are done with the eliminate function as well. And let me make runoff, and let's see, hopefully I don't have any issues with missing semicolons, and looks like I don't. So make runoff. Okay, sure, compare. Yep, I'm missing the string.h function. String.h include, sorry, include string.h. And let's try make runoff. Okay, spelling errors, and this is in line 153. Candy dates. Alright, make runoff. Another error. What is this? On line 184, candidate. Okay, is it supposed to be candidates? Yeah, it's candidates. My bad. Make runoff. Okay, so I seem to be missing the S on many of the candidates. Alright, so that's it, I guess. Make runoff. Alright, so finally it compiled, and let's try one of the examples. They only gave us one example, so that's the tricky part of a runoff, right? If they gave us a few more examples, we could have tested it out and see what our error is, but I guess it's fine. We can create our own test cases. So make runoff /runoff Alice, Bob, and Charlie. 5 voters. and we get Alice as the winner, which is correct. So now let's use check 50 to check if everything I did in this program was correct. That was a very long program, and it's bound to have errors, but hopefully there isn't. Alright, so thank God we didn't get any issues. If you guys like this video, tap the like button and subscribe. If you guys have any questions, comment down below and I'll try my best to help you guys out. And see you guys on the next video. Bye bye.